I guess to get it started, I think of Cormie as a really spiritual person. However, and of course anybody that knows me a little bit realizes I come with enough curmudgeonry and a little bit of baggage to maybe go against the grain. The thing about Cormie and his spirituality is that it's just so real, it's nothing to put on about it. I think Cormie's a rubber meets the road kind of guy. I don't think he always gives the answer that we're supposed to give, which makes it a little more real. And of course he's got a lot of experiences. And I do know this, just to again start out, and I'll let Cormie sort of go. Somewhere in the hills of western North Carolina, I believe, is where this all started, with some drop of Cherokee blood. I don't even know what year. Well, 87 years ago this past April, I'm assuming. Odell, is that your first or middle name?
Yeah.
Cormie Odell Hildebrand stepped on the face of the earth. And just start right there. I mean, that was back, what year was that?
1928.
1928.
Yeah.
So just a little bit before the Depression. Of course, I'm from the country too, and my family would tell you they didn't realize it was a depression. It was just the way it was.
Yeah. We were kind of at the edge of the country, and it was a small mill and furniture factory town. And my mother and her side of the family, they worked in textiles, and my dad, he was the first out of 14 children in his family. He was one of 14 brothers and sisters. He was the only one that ever worked in a factory. All the rest of them were outside people or doing some of their own business or something like that. He started working in the furniture factory, and of course when the Depression hit, that wiped out the factories. Factories closed, went out of business. Textile mills closed, went out of business. When I was 5 years old, my dad left home to look for work, him and some other guys, and he never did come back. And that left me with grandparents and my mother and a couple of sisters. And actually I grew up with just pretty much one sister, because one of my sisters they loaned out. I don't know, people don't do that anymore, I don't think. But
I don't know that I've ever heard of being loaned out.
But I had an aunt and an uncle, and their daughter had died, a teenage daughter had died, and they had sort of a small, he worked in a plant and also farmed some on the side. And so their daughter had always helped them with the cow and all that, gardens and all that stuff. So, and housework and such. And so they loaned my sister Jackie out to my Aunt Lydia and Uncle Lum. And so she was raised up by them, and turned out that very well. She got a good education. She grew up being a fine young woman and all that.
Yeah. Uncle Lum.
Lum, short for Columbus. His name was Columbus. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody called him Lum for short. Yeah. And as the Depression War only got worse, of course, it reached a point where my granddad had to go find a place to live, because he was kind of a head man in the textile mill, and it was a privately owned company. And as the Depression wore on, more and more people were laid off, and my granddad came from, instead of being superintendent, he became a foreman, then a section leader, and then he wound up being just a worker in the mill, and the owner was taking over the management, and finally they closed down. So my granddad went to live with one of his other daughters, and it left Mom and me and my sister Doris and my sister Patsy. And actually my sister Patsy was only a half sister. She was a result of a rape. I witnessed the rape. two brothers came into our house in the night and held a pistol on him. At that time, my granddad still lived with us, and held a pistol on my granddad and threatened to kill him if Mom didn't submit. And they raped her. And I was looking through. We lived in a house where the doorknob had been removed. You know how there's a hole like that where the doorknob and all that goes? And I was watching all that going on through there, and it had a tremendous effect on me later on in life.
How old were you?
At that time, I was about I was in first grade, about six years old.
Yeah, about the time you can remember about anything that goes on in life.
Yeah, that's about the time I started believing that there was no such thing as a God, because I'd been hearing about this God guy, and I got him mixed up with Santa Claus, because everything they had to say about God and Santa Claus, it was the same thing. They had the same attributes, same characteristics, and all that. And then the the real nail that drove the roof on was when I was about 6 years old. I had said something, I don't even remember what I said. But my mother said, if you say that again, God's going to strike you dead. This was the test. I went out behind the garage and said it again and pointed upstairs, and nothing happened. And so, and when nothing happened, either Mom was lying or else there was no God. And so I began believing. And I saw a lot of other things that it caused me to realize that there was no God. At least that was what I came to believe.
Yeah.
And I lived my life like that. Yeah.
I could, knowing you, and realizing that culture changes. 6 years old in that day was a little older than what it is today, I think. Knowing Cormie, I would say that you were a thinker even then, and probably filled with a lot of pride even then. And you had to have an answer.
Yes, I did.
And,
my grandma had took care of me while my mom and my granddad were still working, and she was disabled, and she took care of me there at the house. And since she didn't get around too well, we'd sit there, especially in the wintertime, and she'd teach me how to read. By the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I was reading the funnies and the newspaper and stuff like that. When I started school at the age of 6, I was already reading, and the teacher had a hard time accepting that there was a 6-year-old reading already. I could read Dick and Jane right through, flip, 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 just like that. Yeah, and but things got so bad that because of the depression, we left. And my mom, somehow or another, through his family, my dad's family, had gotten in touch with him, and she let him know that she couldn't take care of us any longer. And because I was a wild one, I really was. I didn't even go to school most of the time. I'd go to the library and get me a stack of books and head for the woods. I'd sit and read books all day long instead of going to school. Enjoyed that a whole lot more. National Geographic, adventure books, stuff like that. Moby Dick, things, classic literature. And that was like when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade. And so between the 4th and 5th grade, my dad came and got me and my sister Doris and took us to Virginia. I got up there and found out he already had another family. But that worked out really well. My stepmother had to be an angel on earth. She accepted me and my sister Doris into as a part of her family, as if we had been always a part of her family. And she treated us that way. She's probably one of the reasons I'm alive today, because she helped me turn around a little bit. Instead of being so wild, I started helping.
For a short time, huh?
Yeah. She helped to get me organized a little bit and get me back in school and helping around the house and things like that.
So you moved straight to Stanton.
Yeah.
And one of the, I don't remember exactly, if anybody who ends up ever hearing this, I don't know who will. If you know Cormie, and I guess you could throw me into this too. We like to laugh quite a bit, but we might laugh at some stuff. It's just hard scrabble life, I guess we sort of understand it. But with Cormie, you can get a lot of tears and you get a lot of laughter. You can get a lot of mixes in between. But I know one of the funny stories that I've heard, and I don't remember it exactly, is when you first went to school in Stanton, you came home sort of upset.
Oh my!
Because they didn't know you didn't know your name.
Well, the 5th grade teacher called the roll, and I didn't answer, and so she said everybody's name I didn't call. Raise her hand. I raised my hand, and she called me up front. She says, "What is your name?" And I told her my name is Odell. She says, "Odell Hildebrand," and I said, "Yes." And she said, "That's not really your name." And she said, "Your name is Cormie." I said, "What? I'd never heard that before. I'd never seen it before. Your name is Cormie." I didn't know how to spell it. Yeah. And so I went home and talked to my dad about it. Found out that my dad's great aunt, who was a full-blooded Cherokee, had given me that name, and it has some special meaning in Cherokee. It means some kind of a sea eagle or something like that. I found that out later on in life. But so I had 2 names. I had Odell at home and I had Cormie at school.
I thought that was amazing that you didn't know that till the 5th grade.
I know. Well, that was the way it was back then. I mean, down in North Carolina especially, a lot of guys grew up never knowing their name. All they knew was their initials, like AW and JD and PC, and they called them by initials.
My dad actually has a similar story, and he was younger than you, but not too much. But he was, I guess, by 8 or 10 years the youngest child in a family. So his youngest sibling was, I guess, maybe in 8th grade. She's still alive, Aunt Sarah. She's your age, I guess. And they all went to school, high school, elementary school in rural western Kentucky together. And the first day of school, the 1st grade, as they got ready to go home, she found my dad, and he was just really torn up, crying. And she says, "What's wrong?" And she says, "They don't know my name here." And my dad's name is James, but he went by his middle name, Donald, or Donnie, everybody in the family. But the school called him James, and he'd never really heard that. And sort of same. So when I heard that, I thought, I can relate.
Yeah, it was kind of common back then.
Yeah.
You never knew one of your names.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had people ask me how I ever got started drinking, using alcohol. And this goes back to North Carolina while I was still a young guy, about 8, 9, 10 years old. And when I was 8 years old, of course, this was during the Depression, and a gentleman who had a sawmill took me on pulling the slabs away from the saw, and he paid me a nickel an hour. A grown man was getting 10 cents an hour then. And man, I thought, I'm going to make a bunch of money. What I didn't know was that whenever the saw stopped, my time stopped. He wrote it down in a book. And when the saw started back up again, my time started again. Yeah. But that gave me probably maybe a dollar or more a week, and I contributed part of that to Mom. And a bunch of us guys, and a little older than me, most of them, and on Saturday evening and Saturday night, we'd sit around this great big old oak tree. I'll never forget this tree. And we'd get a jug of wine, a gallon of wine, and we'd sit around and drink wine and cuss and stuff like boys do. And
and you were just 8 or 9.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was 10 years old, a guy came by with a truck one day, and there's a bunch of us out there playing around in front of a market, and he wanted to know if you guys want to earn some money. Yeah, man, everybody wanted to earn some money. He said, "Well, I'll give you all a quarter if you come out here and pick up cotton balls." I have to explain what that means. The boll weevil hits into the cotton bolls before they open, and they drop off, and that's you lose your cotton that way. And so what he wanted us to do is go through and pick up the old cotton bolls and put them in a sack. He'd burn them. That way it would kill because the boll weevils laid their eggs in that old cotton boll, and that helped to cut the population down. And so at the end of the day, we all lined up to get our quarter. He said, "Y'all misunderstood." He said, "I'm in a quarter a week." In other words, he wanted us to come out there every day. Well, none of us went back. Yeah, none of us went back. And just crazy stuff like that. Broke my arm about that time, fell out of a tree and broke my arm. And they put a cast on it with a metal thing and to hold it straight. And after a couple of weeks, all the guys were going swimming down the creek. They built a dam down there, made us a swimming pool, and they wouldn't let me go in because I had that cast on. So one of the guys took his pocket knife and cut the cast off. So that's why I've got a crooked right arm.
Yeah. It just goes to show no patience for Cormie. Had to be right in the middle of it, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
At what age did you decide you didn't have to be in the middle of it? 75?
No. I'm still thinking about that.
Still thinking about it?
Yeah. I don't have to have the attention that I used to require, though. I don't need the attention that I used to. I just craved it. I craved attention. Well, I didn't have a daddy growing up, and I think that might have had something to do with it. I don't know. I don't like to get into all that psychology stuff. But that might be one of the reasons that I craved so much attention back then. But I think my stepmother helped me with a lot of that. Yes. When I was 12 years old, I went to work for Kroger part-time, and up there in Stanton, Virginia. And I worked at that until I was 15 part-time. And when I was 15, the third day of the 9th grade, I was a little bit behind because I'd gone through the 2nd grade 2 times. Because when we moved down in North Carolina, we moved from one school district to another, and my mom, we moved in the middle of the night. I guess we snuck out. And my mom didn't take school records with me, so they made me do the 2nd grade over again. So I was a little behind. So when I was 15, and 3rd day of the 9th grade, the teacher dissed me, and she came back there and shook her big old bony finger in my face and said, "You ain't no good. You're never going to be any good. You just like your old daddy. He wasn't no good either." And I knew she didn't even know who my daddy was. And that aggravated me no end. And I sat there and fumed the whole rest of the class. When the class was over, I threw my books in the locker, grabbed my jacket, went down and asked him at Kroger's and asked the manager if he could put me on full time. And that was the end of my formal schooling when I was 15. And that introduced me to something else too. It got me back to the alcohol bit.
I remember one time years ago you talking about, I guess Kroger was a big supermarket chain even back then, different than today, but
Yeah.
there was some water contraption or something in the back that the old men stuck the bottle of whiskey in, and of course you being a full-timer had the rights to it, I guess now, didn't you?
Yeah. I see these barrels every once in a while on construction sites, only they're plastic now. But back then they were wood, and they had a spout at them, and every morning they put a chunk of ice in there and fill it up with water, and it was back in the stock room, and if you want to drink of water you go back and get that because they didn't have any electric coolers. And so we did that. Well, I wasn't working there full time more than 2 or 3 days, so I found out there was more than water in that thing. There was a jug always in there. And so I said, "Well, whose is that?" And they said, "Well, it's all of us. You know, if you want some, take it." So every time some of them would take a nip, I would take a nip. So I started nipping on the jug all day long. And so I guess most of us, by the time we went home from work in the evening, we were high. Yeah. And but that kind of went on then for the rest of my life. Yeah, I drank every day, and when I was 16, World War II was on at that time. And when I was 16, my dad was already working down in in Baltimore, Maryland, working in the shipyard. I don't know if younger people know about this, but they came up back in those days. These big companies down on the coast came up here in the hills and recruited thousands of people, and they loaded up a special train and special buses, and my dad was a part of that bunch, and a whole trainload that went to Baltimore, Maryland, went to work for Bethlehem Fairfield shipyards, and he was down there. And so when I was 16, my stepmom suggested I might do better with my dad. She suggested to him, not to me. And so I went down there to stay with my dad, and of course I went to work. Had a fantastic job. I really loved it. Worked on the waterfront down on Pratt Street in Baltimore, which is nothing now. That's where used to be all the McCormick spice ships came in, and all that's been tore down now. The warehouses are all gone and everything. But the aroma was something else down there. And I worked in a loft building down there making cargo nets, bumpers, and fenders for the ships. And we used two kinds of rope. They used the white sisal rope for the cargo nets and fenders and stuff. And they used jute, which is a nice, I don't know if you're familiar with jute, but it's brownish and it's nice and soft. And we made landing nets out of that. And if you watch the old movies, you've seen the guys when they were invading the islands out in the Pacific, going down over the side of the ship on those nets and getting into the small boats, landing boats. And there was those kind of nets that I made. And I did real well at it. And I really liked it. But as the end of the war came about, they started closing down. So I wound up with another job working at the B&O Railroad shops as a boilermaker's helper. And but I just couldn't stick with anything for very long. It was always, I was looking for something better, something new, something different, something more exciting. Actually, I didn't know what I was looking for. Yeah, I really didn't.
What did Baltimore open your eyes to otherwise? Big city, country guy.
Oh, man.
All kinds of
And I was on my
stuff
own
going on.
because I worked in the daytime. My daddy worked at night. We slept in the same bed, but we hardly ever saw one another to talk to. And so I was on my own after work in the evening. And I roamed the streets of Baltimore, especially in the downtown, the red hot districts down there, with all the hoochie coochie shows and, the strip shows and the bars and all that stuff. And down on Pratt Street, there was a place down there called the Brick Wall. And that was my first introduction to homosexuality. I found out that about half those guys in there were these guys that were drinking tea and quoting poetry and plunking on their guitars, and all about half of them were homosexuals, professed. They didn't make any bones about it. I know for a lot of times people hide that, or they used to hide it. These guys made no bones about it. And the reason I found out about it is because I had several of them make passes at me and try to pick me up, and I wasn't into that. So really, maybe if I'd have been a city boy or something, I might have gone for it. But I just didn't know anything about that and didn't want to get part of it. Yeah. But and after that, I worked in furniture factories and I worked in textile mills, and I got tired of all that, so I enlisted in the Air Force. well, something new, something different.
I've maybe even in some more detail heard a little bit about Baltimore and Stanton, and like I said, we've laughed and probably come close to tears about it. But then when I met Cormie, which would have been probably 10, 11 years ago, I knew he was in the military. I'll let you, Cormie can tell us about it. But I grew up outside of an Army base And when I met Cormie, I didn't realize he'd ever been in the Air Force. I just knew he was in the Army. And I asked him if he'd ever been to Fort Campbell, which is right outside of where I grew up. And Cormie said, "Yeah, I was there for a week." And again, I didn't know Cormie at all. And he said, "I was in the brig there once." They had gone AWOL, and they had picked him up in Memphis, and that was the closest military installation. They dropped him off at Fort Campbell. I don't think he ever saw the outside of Fort Campbell, just in the brig.
That's right. Yeah.
But that was my introduction to Cormie. I thought, good night.
But I was in the county jail in Memphis for a long time while they were waiting for the military to come pick me up. The shore patrol had gotten to me, and it was the Navy. The Navy has a base not too far from Memphis, up above there, an air base of some kind, and they had a shore patrol, and we were up on the levees there alongside the Mississippi River. A bunch of us drunk and carrying on, and the cops raided. And I was too drunk to run. And so they grabbed me, and they found out I was military, and they just put me in the brig there in the county jail. And while I was in the county jail, we could see across the street to the front steps of the courthouse. And that was the first time I ever saw Elvis Presley. He was doing an interview over there on the courthouse, and I think it might have been when he was getting sworn in or something. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But I know that was when it's going on.
A big deal, huh?
Oh yeah. Of course, I didn't know who Elvis Presley was then. Some of the guys in the bullpen with me, they knew who he was, and they were carrying on and hollering, raising the cane. I didn't know what it was all about.
You were too busy imbibing to be involved with any kind of rock and roll, weren't you?
Yeah. And
but when you went to the Air Force, that didn't work out real well.
No, it didn't. See, I went in the Air Force because I was already drunk, and I went in the Air Force just pretty much because they offered 3 hot meals every day, place to sleep, some clothes, and some spending money. We used to get paid in cash when I went in. I got paid in cash once a month. Okay. And it wasn't very much, 20-some bucks, and pretty soon it went to 50. And but that was enough to, if you squeezed your money just right and knew how to tell tall tales around the bars, you could drink every day and your money would last throughout most of the month. And
you had a guaranteed place to stay and 3 meals.
That's exactly right.
And clothes.
That's right.
Yeah. But there were these things called rules, wasn't it?
The only thing was, I wasn't giving in to that very much. That thing of keeping the rules. I always thought rules were to see how close you could get to them without getting caught. Going over the line. And but I did fairly well because I was a good worker and pretty smart. I'm not just bragging about that. I just was. I was pretty smart, and I could pick up on things real well. I picked up on weapons real well, and so I was a weapons instructor and a drill instructor, and did really well. And finally, we moved from Texas. I moved from Texas to New Hampshire to help close a base down up there, and from there I went to Georgia. And, I was on the ladder of success down there. I was climbing the ladder, getting promoted and everything. But the drinking got the best of me, and I kept not showing up for work, and they only put up with that for so long. So they invited me to go home. They didn't need me anymore because I ceased being a benefit to the Air Force, and so then I went to living on the street for about 3 years, and that was. I never thought it was tough at the time. It was just, that was life. I learned to bum. I could do that real well, and I had a good presentation. I learned very quickly from some of the other guys that had been on the street for a long time that you keep a haircut, a clean shirt, and a shave, and people will be more generous with you.
And not too long ago, we were talking about, and I'm just going to ask you if this was about the time about, I think you said you were in Jacksonville, Florida, and there was a, lack of a better way to put it, maybe a weekly or nightly type revival thing that's going on. If you walk down front at the end and you made the altar call, you could get a hot meal and a place to stay.
Well, it was a street front mission is what it was.
Yeah.
I think it was a Baptist mission. And right in downtown Jacksonville, down in the worst part of
And
Jacksonville.
this would have been about that time period when we were sort of knocking around.
Yeah. And I was on the street and I slept in Salvation Armies and storefront missions and stuff like that all the way from Baltimore down to Miami Beach. And of course, Miami Beach has got the most fantastic place for bums that there ever was. As long as you keep yourself clean and neat, they don't bother with you and you don't bum the wrong people. If they catch you, they put you in the stockade and usually keep the street clean. But that was in Jacksonville, on my way to Miami, and I found out from some other guy that lived on the street there that if you'd go down front, whenever they gave an invitation at the end of the preaching, you had to listen to preaching before they'd feed you. And at the end of the preaching, if you go down front and pray, that they'd let you stay for a week. Yeah. So I went down front. Boy, the guy was real tickled with me and all like that. And he gave me a place to stay for a week and gave me 3 meals a day. Lunch wasn't too much, just a sandwich or something. But most of the time I wasn't around for lunch. I'd be out working the street. And about 4th or 5th night, I came into the preaching session drunk and he kicked me out. But I went down front to get, I guess they wanted you to get saved.
The guy could get saved every other week doing that.
I know.
3
Yeah.
hots and a cot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he went down there with me, the head of the mission went down there with me and prayed with me and all like that. And I guess he thought I'd made a decision of some kind. So they put me up for a week. And but they were good to me and all like that. And I finally wound up down in Miami. And I stayed in a flop house down there run by a nice Jewish lady. She's only about 4 feet tall. Everybody called her Ma Green, that was her name. And she not only provided a place to sleep for a small amount of money, like 35 cents a night or 50 cents a night, depending on what kind of accommodations you wanted. You get clean sheets with 50 cents. And but she also, people called her when they wanted people for little spot jobs and stuff like that. So she got a call for somebody. They wanted 2 guys over at Miami Beach to get the hotel ready for the season. This was in the fall of the year. And so she sent me and a guy named Wolf over there. And we worked. The guy really liked our work. And he asked me to come back the next day. And I found out he didn't ask Wolf. And when I went back over there, I asked him, I said, why didn't you call Wolf to come back? I said, he was a good worker. He said, didn't you notice that Wolf is Jewish? And I said, well, so are you. I said, why would? He said, if I'd called him back here, he said, in a year's time, he'd own the place. So I wound up on Miami Beach.
You didn't take that as an insult, did you?
No. I stayed on Miami Beach that winter and helped him with that hotel. It's a 50-room hotel down on South Beach. And got it all ready. I painted the entire hotel. And
This would have been back in the heyday.
yeah,
In the, late 50s probably?
it was 55.
Yeah.
54 or 55. 54. And fall of 1954. Yeah. And the lobby was 16 feet. It had these great big 12 by 12 foot beams up in the ceiling. And he wanted those redone with spar varnish. So he went, I don't know where he found it, but he got a great big long ladder. We set that thing up, and I don't know if you ever worked with spar varnish or not, but you cut it with denatured alcohol. And so I got up there, and it was 16 feet up, and it was hot, and the stuff started evaporating, and I started inhaling, and the next thing you know, I was drunk and fell off the ladder just from smelling the fumes off that thing. Didn't get hurt. I didn't get hurt. I don't know why. I guess I just was limp. And that was just, one of the stories of my life. When I was down in Texas, back while I was still in the Air Force, had some weird stuff happen down there. Used to on payday, a bunch of those guys get together and we go down on the riverfront in San Antonio, and they have a lot of joints down there. The riverfront down in San Antonio, the river runs right through the middle of San Antonio, and they got it paved alongside the river, and there's nightclubs and beer joints and all kinds of places along there. So we go down there in some of these places, and especially on the Mexican side. In those days, there was a Mexican side and a non-Mexican side in San Antonio. The west side was the Mexican side. We go to the Mexican side, we'd sit in there and sip wine and smoke pot. And this particular Saturday, I must have smoked about 6 joints.
And this is back in the early 50s.
40s. Yes, back in the 40s. And, well, that's before marijuana was illegal or anything like that.
Yeah, I know, not to interrupt you too much, but in the last couple of years they've talked about legalizing marijuana, and they have in places. And I asked you one day what you thought about that, and they said, the worst thing they ever did was make pot illegal. He said when I was in Texas, you just go get it out of the fence row and smoke it, and nobody had a problem.
There was no wars going on over it and all that. It wasn't smuggling it in across the border and any of that stuff. And so what we used to do is we would, about 4 or 5, 6 of us, we'd rent a hotel room, and we'd just use it for showering and changing clothes. And so after a long day of sipping and smoking, we went up to the hotel room to change clothes and get ready to go out to a party at this real fancy nightclub. And while we were up there, and one guy was taking a shower, I was looking out the window. This was an old hotel built back in the 1800s, and it wasn't in the best section of town either. And they had these great big windows that ran all the way from the floor to the ceiling, fantastically tall and wide. No screens. We had the windows open, no air conditioning, any of that sort of thing. Windows open, and I looked across the street, and there was a guy over there waving at me, and he held up a great big magnum of booze and waved me to come over and get a drink, And so
couldn't turn that down.
No way. I just walked out the window. The only thing I forgot, I was on the 5th floor. And the only thing saving my life, of course, was the fact that we were right over the entranceway to the hotel, and they had one of those covered things over the walkway to go out to the street.
Yeah.
And I landed on that thing. I still got all messed up, banged up, bruised up, whatever. I was laid up for quite a while from that. Yeah. Yeah. When the meat wagon came to get me, they thought I was dead. Yeah. But it wasn't from the fall. It was primarily from all the booze I've been drinking that day.
I could see as the guy called you over. At least you thought he was calling you over.
Yeah.
He may have been waving to somebody else.
Could have been.
But I can imagine your eyes lit up.
Yes, I did.
Like there's a guy that loves me. And I'm walking straight to
and
it.
he had a bottle of booze that was about as big as a milk. Those great big milk barrels that they set out for the milkman to pick up. And that was something else.
The meat wagon came to pick you up. Oh, how many lives do you think you had back in that day? More than 9.
Yeah.
I could probably count on
primarily
my 2 hands the times that you probably should have been dead, from falling off a ladder in Miami to walking out a window, and we hadn't even got to the Autobahn in Germany.
and Germany is kind of the first time I was over in Germany was kind of where my life started to turn around, because it got so bad that I couldn't handle it anymore. Yeah. And a bunch of us were out after a bed check back in those days, you had bed check. 11 o'clock at night was bed check. And unless you had an overnight pass, you weren't allowed to miss bed check. Well, a bunch of us we went out, and we tried to get in by bed check. And I was pretty drunk, I guess. But I wasn't too drunk to walk or anything like that. It's just that my timing was off. But we had to run across the Autobahn to get back to the base from where we were. And I saw a car coming down the road, but I was quite sure I could run across her like the rest of them.
Slow motion, no doubt.
You know, you've seen these TV ads where the guy's running and he's taking like 7 league steps, you know? That's what it was like.
And your friends were cheering you on. Come
yeah,
on, Hildebrand.
Come on, Hildebrand. Come on, Hildebrand. Come on, Hildebrand. You can make it. And that old car was, I was very fortunate. It was a Volkswagen Beetle Bug. And he ran under me. And instead of running over me, he ran under me and tossed me off the side of the road. And I found out later, they checked. They tried to, get me up, and they thought I was dead. And so they ran off and left me because they didn't want to get in trouble.
They had to get back to the bed check.
Yeah, because we had a hole cut in the fence. We had it fixed so you could move the fence down and fix it so it didn't look like there was a hole there. But they crawled through the fence. Well, the next morning, I came to when a German on his way to work riding his bicycle ran over my hand, which was laying out in the bicycle path.
That hurt worse than the car, didn't it?
Oh gosh, because I didn't even feel the car.
The first time I heard that story was years ago when Cormie had somehow wrangled me into going to a men's prayer evening, which was pretty good. We had some pizza and some good fellowship and some prayer, and I have a tendency to laugh about stupid stuff, and I never heard that story, and Cormie was telling it seriously, and everybody around was, how do you process all this, what this guy's telling you? Well, he got to the point about getting hit by the car. It was funny enough to me I could hold it in, but when he said and I think he said it that night, he said something along the lines of, the car didn't hurt me, but that damn guy ran over me with the bicycle the next morning. It about killed me. When he said that, I couldn't help but to just tear up and start laughing. I didn't really care what anybody else at the prayer evening thought. That was just funny. And he got tickled and we laughed a long time, and I've always, that's just a good story, but that's one of those 9 or 10 lives that you must have had. Yeah. You might have been saved, physically, because you were so drunk most of the time.
And it was about that time when I met Elvis Presley. I was the commanding officers, the squadron, company commander's, I guess you call it his protection. Because I was a rifleman, and I stayed by the company headquarters when you're in the field and all that kind of stuff. And I made sure that nobody got close to the headquarters without me okaying them. And so we were out in the field, and we stayed out in the field a lot when I was in Germany. And this other commanding officer from another tank company came up, and of course I was running the dismount point, and I made him stop. And I let the commanding officer go on in to see my commanding officer, and his driver stayed there, and we chatted and talked. And that happened more than once. But I didn't know really who Elvis Presley was. I mean, I knew that he was a guy named, just a soldier named Presley, that's all. And but I found out about him later on, and I found out, hey, I spent time chatting with this guy, and he was just a normal, ordinary soldier like everybody else. Wasn't anything special about him. And so that was just one of my experiences over there.
How long were you in Germany, or did you go back a couple of times?
I went back. I was there a couple of years that time.
Because you were in the Army at that point in time.
Yeah.
The Army would take in anybody if they kicked you out of the Air Force. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I didn't let them know that I had gone to. when I got ready to go back into the military, I was afraid to go back in the Air Force because I made a bunch of enemies in there. And so, but I went to the Pentagon and got my discharge cleaned up because I had a discharge that the Air Force or nobody else would have accepted me. And yeah, it was unacceptable. So I met a board of officers at the Pentagon, made an appointment, all like that, had a lawyer, and went up there and I met this board of officers, and they cleaned up my discharge, gave me an honorable discharge. And after they listened to my story, and I think they thought I had, at that time, I think they thought that I had got my life back together and cleaned it up. But really I hadn't. As a matter of fact,
good actor.
I was. And I was partially under the influence when I met the board that day. And so that's, which is why I was so fluent, and I could just carry on conversation. And they wanted to re-enlist me in the Air Force right then and there. And I told them, well, no, I've already promised the sergeant back, because, you know, recruiting people get credit for enlistment. I said, I've already promised the sergeant back to Stanton. And so, but I went back to Stanton is when I went ahead and enlisted in the Army. And I enlisted in the infantry because that's where the promotions are the fastest. Stayed in there a while, and they transferred me to tanks, and that's why I wound up in Germany with tanks. I was a gunner on a tank, I was a driver on a tank, and I got in trouble over that too. The clubs all closed down and we didn't have any booze, so I decided I'd go get some booze. So I took a tank and went out the gate, went down to a little village down there, and
Cold War,
and stuck the tube. It was a 120 millimeter gun, so it was a pretty good sized gun. I stuck the tube into the window of the guest house, and they slid a couple of bottles of cognac down the tube, and would have gotten away with this. But on the way back, I clipped the corner of one of the buildings and knocked a lot of those old buildings, those villages. They were cut stone,
yeah,
and knocked one of those stones out. And of course, the Germans raised Cain about that. I mean, I guess I should say they raised more than Cain. They raised hell, and we had to reimburse them and all that kind of stuff, because they called the law and they called the MPs, and
there was a tank downtown tonight.
yeah. But it was that stuff, getting run over or run under, whatever you want to call it, and just stuff like that. And the thing that finally brought me to the end, that made me want to do something different, was in Thanksgiving 1958. In the military, it used to, they don't do it anymore, but used to, Thanksgiving was a big holiday in the military. Christmas, not much. People went home to be with their families if they could. But Thanksgiving, they always had a big celebration in the dining halls. And they stacked up case after case of beer, bottles of cognac, whiskey, everything you could think of. And I always volunteered to help out. And because it was free booze. Yeah. And I'd get in there ahead of everybody else.
Wasn't because you had a servant's heart, was it?
Not really. That was Thanksgiving 1958. And I remember Thanksgiving 1958, volunteering at the kitchen, not to the kitchen, but the dining room. And the next thing that I can remember, except for what people told me, I was sitting on the side of my bunk one Saturday morning, and I looked down. My bunkmate was an alcoholic also, and I looked down. And I had these stripes on my sleeve, and I said, "Whose shirt have I got on here?" And he said, "It's yours, man. It's got your name on it." I said, "But look," I said, because I stayed private during that time. I stayed a private or a private first class most of the time, and this was a specialist fourth I had on there. How'd that happen? He said, "Man, don't you remember meeting the promotion board and getting promoted?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "When did I meet the promotion board?" He said, "In February." I said, "February? What are you talking about? What is this?" He said, man, this is May. I'd been in a blackout from Thanksgiving of 58 to May of 59. Worked every day, did such a fantastic job that I got promoted, met the promotion board and got promoted, got a commendation from the 7th Army Commander because my inspection had been so great and so good. And I don't remember any of that, except that my bunkmate and the supply sergeant that I worked for directly brought me up to date after they realized that I had been in a blackout for 5 months. Working blackout. And this can happen. I decided I needed to quit. So I tried to quit drinking. I found out you couldn't. You can't if you've been drinking that long and that heavy. I mean, you'll die.
30 years. We were born in 28, you say.
I was 31 years old.
Started drinking at, say, 10, probably a little bit younger than that. So
Yeah.
you've been a drunk for 21 years already.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it anyway, but I think you'd agree. You just said I was drunk for 21 years.
And for from the age of 15, every day drinking. Yeah.
So you don't just quit, I wouldn't think.
Yeah. Well, I would have died if I had. And so I found that I couldn't quit. And so I had the guys just lock me up one weekend in the supply room. And
I could imagine what you went through.
so they locked me up on Saturday morning, and they were going to come back and get me Sunday afternoon. And when they did come and get me back Sunday afternoon, because I couldn't get out on my own, that wouldn't have worked. And my fingers were bloody stumps where I had tried to break open lockers and stuff, and I had. And I had drunk a couple of bottles of Aqua Velva, some shoe polish, which I'd strained through a sock, and a couple other things to keep from going into the DTs too bad. And so I went back to maintenance drinking. I just spaced it out just enough to keep from going into the DTs through June and July. And then I finally decided I'm just going to kill myself. That's the only way I know to get out of this.
So this is the first time you tried to do that?
Right. No, I've tried to kill myself twice before and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I still got the scars from that. And my bunkmate said, well, why don't you go over and see if maybe the medics can help you? So I went on sick call that one morning. It was on a Saturday morning. Matter of fact, it was August the 8th, 1959. I went on sick call, and there was a new doctor there I'd never seen before. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's not going to prescribe me some ETH. That's electrodetergent hydrate and codeine. And I used to get a pint bottle of that, and the doctor would prescribe it for me, and I could keep it in my locker legally to nip on if I needed. And I said, he don't know me, he's not going to do that. When I told him what my problem was, he said, hey, I just found out that they got an experimental program up in 97 General Hospital in Frankfurt. And he said, they can help you out up there. I said, would you like to try that? I said, well, I guess so. So he picked up the phone and called Frankfurt. And they said if I could get myself, I had to sign in. It had to be voluntary. And if I signed myself in voluntary by noon that Saturday, they'd take me into the program, and that they wouldn't charge it against me. In the military, of course, if you are in the hospital for something that you cause yourself, it's considered bad time, and you have to make it up at the end of your enlistment, how many ever days you're in the hospital. They would not charge it against me. Well, I had no way of getting up there. I can't remember how far it was to Charleston. There's no way I could have caught a train and got up there in time. So I went back to my unit. I told my first sergeant, and I went in and told the commanding officer what I was going to do. The commanding officer said, well, Hildebrand, I didn't even know you drank. I never seen you with a hangover. I said, well, sir, I've never had a hangover.
You never have a hangover if you're drunk all the time.
Because I had a bottle underneath my overshoe under my bunk, and I take a couple of snorts before I got out of bed every morning. You just don't have a hangover that way. And I told him what my dilemma was. So he said, if you can find somebody in the unit that's got a car and can take you up there, I said, we'll let him take you up there. So I got a buddy of mine who was a fellow alcoholic, but he was sober that day.
Enough to drive anyway.
Yep. So we went out. Just as we got out the gate, we stopped at the first guest house and got me a half liter of cognac to keep me from going into DTs on the way up there. I did not remember signing in. He said I signed in. The doctor said I signed in. I don't remember anything from then, 4 nights and 4 days. And I think in August of 1959, I was on the cusp of a new life and a new lifestyle, because I kind of came to my senses in the physical rehabilitation room of the psych ward of the 97 General Hospital in Frankfurt, Germany, riding a stationary bike and using little pieces of plastic, cutting them out and gluing them together to make needle boxes. Back then they sterilized the needles, for shooting you up. They sterilized the needles and used them over and over again. And I was making needle boxes and riding this thing. And I found out later, I said, here I am. What am I doing in the rehabilitation room? I haven't been shot. I don't remember being in an accident or anything. So why can't my hand and my foot work too well? Well, when I got a chance to talk to the medic that had been with me during the time I was in that locked ward, he told me the story of my 4 days in there.
So at 4 days, they basically put you in a room, a padded room of some sort?
Yeah, it was a locked room.
And why did they do that? Just to keep you
safe? Yeah.
Because they knew you were going to go through some kind of withdrawal.
Yeah. And there was a couple of other guys in there with me, I found out later. And
don't remember it all.
No. But the medic told me that I went through the withdrawal and the bugs started getting to me, and bugs were crawling up the wall, and to humor me, he told me all this later, that he had given me a folded up newspaper to kill the bugs with, and he was sweeping them up for me and all that stuff. And he said, finally, my body, laying on the bed, my body got rigid and it arched with nothing but my heels in the back of my head touching the bed. And he tried to reposition me, and my body was rigid like a piece of lumber. And he thought I was dying, so he called the charge nurse. And she came in, and he said, I think he's dead or dying. He said, what are we going to do? And the nurse said, well, we're not going to give up on him. He said, he's probably going to die, but we won't give up on him. And she said, why don't we use some of that new experimental medication? I don't remember the name, but it's in my medical record. And he said, okay. He said, how much shall I give him? He told me this. How much shall I give him? She said, oh, he'll give him a big dose. He's going to die anyway. That's his exact words that the head nurse said. Well, as you can see, I'm sitting here talking to you today, and so I didn't die. But I found out that
Could you have done without the biggest dose, though?
Going through the withdrawal or the medication, they don't know which it was, but it did some damage on the left side of my brain, and therefore my right side got affected physically. And of course,
it's almost like it put you in a stroke or something almost.
Yeah, they said it was like almost like going through a stroke. And going through the physical rehabilitation, I stayed there a long time. I don't remember exactly how long I was in the hospital, but I was there a long time until they felt free that I could go back to duty. And you're going to think this is funny, but it wasn't funny at the time. They sent me back to my unit. They were gone. There was nobody there but the guys, and they had 2 or 3 guys that took turns answering the telephone or whatever, and they're all gone out to the boondocks. And so I gathered up my stuff, and they put me on a helicopter and flew me to a place called Grafenwohr in Germany, where they have all the firing ranges and stuff like that for the big guns, tanks and everything. And so that's what they were doing. They had about 8 weeks out there, I think it was. And it was quite a long time. And when I got there, I went in and checked in with the first sergeant. By the way, I found out that while I was in that hospital, the first sergeant was in the hospital for the same reason I was, except that he wasn't as far gone as I was. And he went to the stomach ward and got away with it. Yeah, faked it. Yeah, there was something wrong with his stomach. He got sobered up in the stomach ward. But anyway, I went in and checked in, and the first sergeant says, well, welcome back. He said, I got a special job for you. I said, well, you know, me Top. I said, I'll do anything you want. And he said, I want you every morning, you get the driver, take that 2.5 ton truck out there and go to the commissary and get 300 pounds of ice and 50 cases of beer, come back and ice them down and be ready to serve it when these guys get in from the ranges tonight. He said, I want you to do that every morning. And he said, if I even hear tell of you even sniffing at a bottle of that beer, he said, I'll kick your ass up between your shoulder blades. I said, okay. So every night, every day, I went up, picked up 50 cases of beer, 300 pounds of ice, iced the beer down. That was my main job. And I thought to myself, why in the world would he do this to me? But I did it, and it never even dawned on me during that time to take a drink of that beer. Not one time did it ever dawn on me to even think about taking a drink of it. I don't know why, but I got through that time without drinking anything. And so I stayed sober. And then in February of 60, I came back to the States. And I still stayed sober. But while I was in the hospital, I met this wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. Wolfgang von Brettschneider. I'll never forget his name as long as I live. He was blind in his left eye. His left arm was crippled up, and he had an artificial left leg. He'd been on the Russian front during World War II. And he worked with me. And he got me hooked up with Alcoholics Anonymous. There's where I first heard the word alcoholic. I had never heard the word alcoholic before. I'd never heard Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd never heard AA. Now, I had been called many things, but I had never been called an alcoholic before. I never heard anybody else be called an alcoholic. Smokeheads, drunks, sots, town drunk, worthless, idiot, trash, whatever.
Did it help you to have a name for it?
It did. It helped me to know what was wrong with me. I could blame it on something.
Right.
You know? Yeah. It's not me. It's something wrong with me. That's why I'm doing it. And I said I was probably born that way. I was primed to be an alcoholic. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it felt like it at the time. And he got me started in AA.
This was in 1960.
No, this was still in 1959 while I was still in the hospital. I skipped that part, and I need to go back and pick up on that because it's very important. And I was in the hospital for a long time. But while I was still shaky, probably the day after I came out of that locked ward, where I still had to sit on my hands to keep them from taking trips, he said he had some guys he'd like to talk to me about this thing of drinking. And so 2 guys came and talked to me. And they told me they had found a way to stay sober and enjoy it. And I thought that was crazy. They never mentioned AA, they never mentioned meetings or anything like that to start with. And then they told me that they did go to a support meeting, and I'd be welcome to come if I wanted to, and they'd come by and get me. In front of this great big monstrous cathedral looking church. And they said, this is where we get out. And I said, there's no way in hell you ain't getting me in no church house. You know, no way. No way am I going to go in that church house. And they said, well, we're not going to church. They've loaned us the basement to have a meeting in. So I went in there. And as I walked in the door, there was a guy I hadn't seen in 10 years. The last time that I had seen him, we'd both been in the stockade. And we'd both been in solitary confinement. And the only reason I had seen him was after everybody else got out to the exercise room, out to the outside exercise area, they let he and I out to get some exercise. Well, even in jail or prison, you can always manage to get something to drink. And I had arranged it for some of the guys that were on work details. to bring something back to drink. And so it let me know that there was a 6.5 ounce Coke bottle out there with alcohol in it. And they told me where it was. So I went out and got it, and Earl, the guy that was with me, he drank a little bit of it, and I drank all the rest of it. And I crawled under the building to do that, and I went blind. I couldn't find my way out from under the building. I found out this was paint thinner the guys had brought back, and which is nothing but denatured alcohol, which can kill you. It didn't kill me for some reason or another. Well, they were getting ready to put an escape warrant out on me, and Earl told them where I was, and they came and got me, and I eventually got my sight back. And after about a day or so, and that's the last time I'd seen Earl. And it's 10 years later. He's got stripes from his shoulder down to his elbow. And I asked him, I said, "What in the hell are you doing in here?" He said, "Same thing you are." I said, "I don't know why I'm here." He said, "Well, you'll find out." And so that was my first introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, they didn't even call it Alcoholics Anonymous. They just said AA, and which didn't make any sense to me, but I went along with it. And I stuck with that. After I came back to the States, I still stuck with it. And I'm sober for 17 months. And I got my wife and family moved up there, and to where I was stationed in Aberdeen, Maryland. And we lived in a little cul-de-sac, and we all went together for a New Year's Eve party. And since I didn't drink, they promoted me to bartender, which was a mistake. Remember, it's New Year's Eve, it's cold outside, the furnace is going, it's hot in there. The bar was a kitchen bar in a little tiny kitchen, just a kitchenette. And they said that I must have, they said I didn't drink anything. They said I must have got high from the fumes like I did off of that stuff down in, when I was painting that ceiling, painting those bar. Yeah. And went into a blackout. I guess I started drinking. And next thing I know, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I came to my senses, and there's the hostess sitting over there in front of me. The host was passed out in a chair over here. My family was gone. Everybody else was gone. And I said, "Wow." I said, "I took a nap." She said, "Nap? Nothing." She said, "You've been nonstop talking since about midnight." I said, "What time is it now?" She says, 4 a.m. Yeah. I said, "Where is everybody?" They all went home. The party's over. Scared me real bad. Stayed drunk for 2 weeks that time. Finally got back into AA. Place we can walk inside. We got the Beckley FMRS building is inside hallways are like a figure 8. Mm-hmm. And so if I have a break between patients, clients, I go take a walk. Sometimes somebody misses an appointment. That gives me maybe 40 or 50 minutes.
What do you do?
I'm a mental health counselor over at FMRS Health System.
You help with addiction and recovery?
Not there. I do that on my own.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I teach a class on Wednesday mornings. I don't work on Wednesday mornings, so I teach a class on Wednesday morning up at Bryant Safe House out in Prosperity. Mm-hmm. And I'm also on the board of directors of that. And I help out up at the Southern West Virginia Fellowship Home uptown Beckley, which is a recovery place for guys. And I'm active in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I do help a lot of guys, but I made it clear that when I went to work there, I would not be helping people as a part of my job with addiction, because I wanted to continue to do that, kind of like as a payback for all the help that guys are giving me over the years. And it's mostly I deal with grief or bereavement, panic and anxiety disorder, some depression, anger management, And I have my PTSD caseload has picked up quite a bit now. Getting a few guys back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And at the VA, the only treatment they have for PTSD is a group, and it's over at either Salem or down in Hampton, Virginia. And if a guy's got a job or something, he can't quit for 6 weeks to go over there and live for 6 weeks, you know. So they send him over to our place, and we work with him. And I've got some guys. I've got some guys from Vietnam also. Yeah. I really enjoy that, and it's great to see people just kind of get a hold of their lives and get turned around. And I had a lot of help doing that.
Cormie, I don't know exactly where we are in the story. And again, I've heard most of what you told me, but it's always been in bits and pieces and not as much chronological as we've done today. But it seems like to me we're in the early 60s.
Uh-huh.
You've been sober for 17 months. You keep ending up being the beer hauler or the bartender.
Yeah.
You got around a gas furnace, at least we're going to blame that. And you got high as a kite and started drinking. And you blacked out. And then you went on a 2-week drunk. And you mentioned for the first time your wife, and I think maybe even your kids. And I know that that's pretty contentious, and we don't even have to get into that at this point in time. But it seems like to me you've been going to Alcoholics Anonymous a little bit. You run into a buddy. We'll say Providence always happens in the rearview mirror, doesn't it?
Yes.
At least that way for me. I don't ever see Providence in the future. I see it in the rearview mirror. Don't always like it, even in the rearview mirror. And so I guess things are probably in the chronological part of the story are getting ready to get worse before they probably make a turn for the best.
Yes. It was during this time back in the States, there at Aberdeen.
I'm sorry about that. Let me get this. Go ahead and keep talking.
This was during this happened, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they sent me back to Germany. They weren't supposed to do that. After you had a long tour, and especially an unaccompanied tour, you're supposed to have at least 2 years back in the States before they send you out again. Well, they didn't. And I was upset. I was angry. My wife thought I had volunteered for it, which I hadn't. I didn't want to go back. I hated it. And at the time, I just didn't want to go back. And so that meant that she moved back to Virginia, and I got ready to move over to Germany, collected my travel money and a whole bunch of other money that had come into me. And she went on back to Virginia, and I got the movers in and shipped everything back to Virginia, all the furniture, cleaned up the apartment, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon I got the key turned over to the landlord, and I walked out my back door, and my next door neighbor was having a cookout. He said, "You haven't had anything to eat today. Why don't you come on over and have something to eat?" And he said, "Have something to drink too if you want it." He said, "I got tea, coffee, got Coca-Cola, got beer if you want it." And I said, "I think I'll have a beer." I mean, I know it's dumb, but that's what I did. I said, "I think I'll have a beer." And he had these little tiny short bottles of Rolling Rock. I always remember the fact that it was a little short bottle, about as tall as this short coffee cup here. And I do not remember finishing that first bottle of beer. I blacked out. That's how far advanced I was in my alcoholism. I blacked out, hadn't had anything to drink for 8 months then. This was after that New Year's Eve thing. 8 months after that. I hadn't had anything to drink. And I blacked out before I finished that little short bottle of beer. That was on a Friday afternoon. The next thing I know, it was Tuesday morning. Came to my senses. I was laying in front of the Greyhound and Trailways bus stations. They were at the corner of New York Avenue and 12th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., 100 miles away from where I had drunk that little bitty bottle of beer. And I was laying there in the grass across the street from the Greyhound and Trailways bus stations with nothing on but my drawers and my socks. Of course, all my travel money was gone, my clothes were gone, my shoes were gone. I knew where the Union Mission was because D.C. had been, in the olden days, one of my main stomping grounds for drinking and cutting up and having fun. I knew where the Union Mission was. So I walked down the street with just my drawers and my socks on to the Union Mission. And they cleaned me up and showered me, and they have to delouse you. That's a part of their protocol. So they deloused me. They gave me some clean clothes. And they gave me a bus ticket back to Aberdeen. And it's stamped in great big red letters on it, not to be redeemed for cash. Because that's what guys used to do. They'd go to the mission or somewhere and they'd get a bus ticket and go cash it in and buy booze with it. Well, here I am with no money, a bus ticket back to Aberdeen, and I'm starting to tremble, shake. And in D.C. it was bad business to try to bum because there's a cop on every corner. So I was afraid to bum any money. And a sudden light came on in my brain. I said, bum the cop. And so I did. I walked up to this cop and I said, look, man, I said, I need a drink bad. I said, could you spare $1? He said, sure. He pulled out his money, gave me $1. I walked down to the next corner and hit the next cop, and I got $1 off of him. And I got a bottle of beer. That kept me going for a little bit. And it was time for the bus. I went back to Aberdeen. As soon as I got there, I ordered something to eat because I was starting to get hungry. And I ordered 2 bottles of beer. Back in those days, for $2, you could get a lot of stuff back in, this was in early 60s. And I also dropped a dime and called my sponsor in AA. And he came and got me before I finished the second bottle of beer. And he took me to his house and kept me until meeting night that night. Then after the meeting, I was starting to go into the DTs, starting to shake and tremble. And so a couple took me up to their apartment. A couple of people in AA took me up to their apartment there in Havre de Grace, Maryland, overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. And they stayed up with me all night. The couple and some other guys from AA feeding me K-Rose syrup and black coffee to keep me from going into the DTs. K-Rose syrup replaces I don't know if a lot of people know it, but alcohol turns into sugar immediately after you drink it. And it replaced that sugar from the alcohol, and it kept me from going into the DTs. And I had been in AA for a couple of years at that time, and I have been going to a lot of meetings. I had done a lot of the things they asked me to do. I'd even taught a class on the 12-step program. But that night up there in Smitty and Florence's apartment, Smitty, he had 17 years of sobriety at that time. Smitty kept asking me, but Cormie, he says, you know, it says that in the big book, which is the AA protocol, in the big book it says that these are the steps we took. And it's got the 12 steps there. How many of those steps did you took, Cormie? And I said it just like he did, because he didn't say, how many have you taken? He said, how many did you took, Cormie? And he kept saying that, how many did you took? I said, Smitty, you know, I said, I've memorized those steps. I know them from heart. I can quote them to you backwards. He said, I know that. He said, you showed off doing that before. He said, but how many did you took? I said, Smitty, you remember me? I taught a class on that. And he said, well, we know that, and it was a good class too, but how many did you took? And this kept on going on for a while.
Rubber meets the road.
Oh, man. About daylight, I said, Smitty, you know what? I've never taken not even one. Not even step one. Well, step one says that I admitted I was powerless over alcohol. I'd always said I was an alcoholic, but I always wondered why I was an alcoholic. That morning, on September the 6th, 1961, in Haverty Grace, Maryland, looking over the Chesapeake Bay as the sun was rising, I still remember it was like a picture that'll burn in my mind forever. I was looking out the window as the sun come up over the Chesapeake Bay, and it dawned on me, I'm an alcoholic because I'm powerless over alcohol. So that was the beginning of really the beginning of the turnaround in my life. In '59, it was the kind of the cusp of the turning around, getting me ready for it.
I know we've talked a lot about just in general about addiction and things like that. But I know, at least in my opinion, I think temperament and personality have a lot to do with things. And you've always been readily to admit, and still this day, I think at 87, I wouldn't say you struggle with it, but I think you realize that you'd at least tell me, I'd give you the grace to say you don't have to. Overcoming that pride and that personality and that temperament is still part of it every day for you.
So bad.
I'm sure it was freeing, but it was a big thing that for you to actually say you didn't have power over anything.
Yes, it was only by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And I didn't even believe there was a God at that time. And
I mean, for Cormie Hildebrand to say he doesn't have any power over something is a big thing.
That's right.
To you. It may not be to anybody else, but knowing you, I know it's a big thing.
And this was a stumbling block for me. This thing of believing there was no such thing. I didn't say I don't believe in God. I mean, I was a true atheist. I belonged to the Ethical Society of Washington, D.C., which was a bunch of agnostics and atheists who tried to live a nice, upright, clean life without admitting that there was a God, you know. And I was stuck at step one because step two it says you believe that a power greater than yourself could restore you to sanity. And so I couldn't believe in this power greater than myself. So I was stuck there, but I was solid on that. I knew that I was powerless over alcohol. There was no question in my mind. But this trip back to Germany.
So went back to Germany then.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. We haven't really talked a lot about it. We have some, but you know, at what point in time was your marriage just completely over with right here? Or is it still hanging on? Or
This is the beginning of it being over with. Because when she went back to Stanton and I went on to Germany, that's when my bosom buddy moved in on me. And that's another story altogether. Yeah. The actual divorce didn't take place until, this was in '60, and the actual divorce didn't take place until '68. But this was the beginning of it.
so you went back to Germany.
Yeah. And this was all, I look back on it now, you know, and I see this was all God's plan. Because I went over there was no AA group where I was. I started one. I met a psychiatrist and a social worker over there, and they invited me to start one in their clinic.
So you were able to start the program after you taught the program, and you still hadn't took it all.
That's right.
That's right.
But that's a part of the AA program. Is if you go somewhere where there isn't one, you start one.
Right.
You know. Well, we advertised it in the Daily Bulletin. We had meetings scheduled for Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday every week. 3 meetings a week. For 26 meetings, no one showed up. And this was advertised in the Daily Bulletin every day for all the bases in that area of Kitzingen, Germany. And on the 27th night, this is a turning point. On the 27th night, no one was showing up. I was ready to throw the coffee. They even gave me a coffee pot, furnished coffee, gave me money to buy the material, you know, literature and stuff for AA and all that. And I was getting ready to throw the coffee pot, the books, and everything else out the window and go across the street to the club and get drunk. That's just how fed up I was. And about that time, a guy stuck his head around the corner of the door and said, "Is this where that AA meets?" And this is a God thing. Yeah. It's a Romans 8:28 thing. And I can say that now, but I couldn't say it back then. It was Louis P. Gardner. I can use his name because he's dead now. He drank himself to death. Never did get sober. Never did. He tried hard. He tried real hard. Never did get sober. But after a number of meetings, this was the beginning. We got a good group going. And we were talking about the spiritual aspect of AA one night. And I was questioning it. I said, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. I can't do it. I guess I'm just doomed, I said, to struggle the rest of my life. And Louis says, Cormie, after the meeting, I want to talk to you. After the meeting, he said, I know a guy you need to talk to about this spiritual thing. So, after the meeting, Louis and I, we hiked 2 miles up the hill to where we were stationed at a place called, I forget, some concern, the Flat Concern. And they call it Flat Concern because that's where during World War II the anti-aircraft batteries were for shoot the American planes down. But anyway, we went up there. That's where we were stationed, both of us. And he introduced me to a guy named Jerry Green. And then Louis disappeared. I found out later he went across the street and got drunk. And but Jerry talked to me about spiritual things. He presented the gospel to me the way he would present the gospel to just about anybody. And I challenged him on everything. I said, I don't believe in that hell bit. I don't believe in the hell bit. I don't believe in the God bit. I don't believe in the sin bit and all that. I said, you're wasting your time. And he said, have you ever read the scriptures? I said, well, no. He said, well, you're arguing from a position of ignorance. He's calling me ignorant. Here's this young private calling me a sergeant ignorant.
You'll show him.
Yeah. And he said, I dare you to take this little Gospel of John and read it every day for a week and come back and we'll argue some more. He said, that way you won't be arguing from a position of ignorance.
Yeah.
I said, well, I'll take you up on that.
And when you mentioned the Gospel of John, I've told several people this. Usually I always have a lot of pretty good stories I can tell somebody is relevant, and a lot of them are Cormie stories. And then I realized that people would say, hey, do you know Cormie? I'm like, yeah. There's been a lot of people that I didn't know knew you that know you. And of course you've touched a lot of lives, but you talk about providence. I think you've told me, and I've always got a tickle out of it. I'm pretty sure the Gospel of John doesn't have anything to do with the virgin birth. Doesn't mention it.
No, as a matter of fact, later on in life, I had a guy challenge me one time, and the pastor was doing a Bible study down here, and this is after, I've been a Christian a long time, and he said, you can't be a Christian unless you believe in the virgin birth. Well, the pastor knew my story, and he let this guy and myself go on a little bit, and I said, I think you can. I said, I became a Christian without believing in the virgin birth. And the pastor said, spoke up, said, you ought to hear his story. He said, he got saved from reading the Gospel of John. And he said, there's no mention of the virgin birth in there. He'd never been to church before in his life except to a couple of weddings and funerals. And he read it over in the scripture before he knew nothing about the virgin birth. And this guy was really angry because he couldn't believe that you could be saved without believing in the virgin birth.
Well, and the thing about providence, I've always thought after I've heard your story that the reason there's no mention of the virgin birth in John is because if Cormie Hildebrand had read that, and there had been back in 1962, 63, whenever we were, his response would have been, "Yeah, I've got you now, Mr. Green."
Yeah.
If there had been a virgin birth in the Gospel of John, Cormie would have been able to say, "Well, hell no," but he didn't know any better.
That's exactly right.
And so I always get tickled out of that, because if that would have given you the reason to throw it away and never come back.
I know this is hindsight now, but when he gave me that Gospel of John to read and told me to read it every day for 7 days, I didn't know that there was another God moment coming at 4 o'clock the next morning when the whistle blew and woke us all up, fall out, and go to the boondocks because the Russians were coming across the border. And they did this once in a while. They'd come across, we'd go out there, and they'd go back, and we'd advance up to the border, and then they'd come over, and we'd back up, and stuff like that. This went on every once in a while. The only thing is, since this was a big flap going on with the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything, this went on for a long time. 8 long weeks we were out there. And all I had to read was the Gospel of John. And I read it, I don't know how many times every day. And every time I read it, there was 2 portions of scripture that grabbed my attention. One of them was in John 10:10. I'll always remember it. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and you might have it more abundantly. And I knew I was walking around a dead man. There was no question in my mind about that. I knew that just as sure as I know that I'm sitting here today. I knew I was just a walking around dead man. So that grabbed my attention. And then over towards the end of the Gospel of John, where Doubting Thomas, and I know everybody's heard about Doubting Thomas. Even I'd heard about Doubting Thomas. Didn't know why he was called Doubting Thomas, but even I'd heard about Doubting Thomas. And so Jesus challenged Thomas to put his fingers in the holes in his hands and his hand in the hole in the side. Thomas didn't even touch him. He just fell down and worshiped him. And it says, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. You might, and believing you might have life through his name. Where was that life thing again? Life. And I kept coming back to those 2 verses. Life. We went back just before Christmas. We went back to Garrison out of the field. And I knew that I was whipped. I knew that Jerry had won. I did not want to go back and admit it. So I didn't. I just pretended like I didn't know Jerry. Never heard of him before. And but New Year's Eve again. New Year's Eve.
Just acted like I didn't know him.
Everybody is gone partying, except the guy downstairs and answering the telephone. And me, I'm the only guy rattling around by myself in the barracks in Kitzingen, Germany, up on the top of this hill up there. And I said, well, I know I'm not going to go to the club because I'd already made up my mind I'd kill myself before I ever took another drink. And even though my life was miserable, I was not going to take another drink. So I said, maybe I'll go over and argue with that kid Jerry. And he was just a kid as far as I was concerned. And so I went over, and sure enough, Jerry was there in his office. He put on a pot of coffee, and we sat there and we talked and we talked and we talked and we talked. And Jerry got my attention then. He shared the Gospels with me, plain and simple. I listened to him. He shared not only from the Gospel of John, but he shared a few verses from Romans with me. And about midnight on December the 31st, 1962, up on top of the hill in Kitzingen, Germany, I fell on my face up there, and I trusted the Lord Jesus Christ as my own personal Savior. And a miracle took place, and I can't call it anything else except a miracle, because even though I hadn't had anything to drink since September of 61, I had wanted to drink every day since then. Sometimes I wanted to drink so bad that I'd go hide and cry, or I'd call somebody from 8A, or I'd call somebody. We'd get together and talk and have some coffee or something. And but I'd already determined I wasn't, that I'd die first. Matter of fact, I already made arrangements to kill myself. Just never got around to it. And I had the gun and the bullets, and the pills and all that stuff ready to kill myself. But I fell on my face and I trusted Christ as my Savior. And miracle of miracles, I noticed about 3 days later, for the first time in years and years, I had no craving for something to drink. Now, I hardly ever hear of that happening for anybody. But I figure it was a sign that God, which I now believe in, that was a sign that God had given me that what I had done was real. And I've never doubted it since then. Oh, I've had a lot of questions because, like you say, I didn't understand about God. I didn't understand a lot about Jesus. It was all a learning experience for me because I had to start from scratch. And when I moved back to the States again in Colorado, this is another God thing. I tried to go back to Aberdeen, which I loved that position. That was a school, ordnance school. I loved to be a teacher. I even went to the Pentagon to try to get my orders changed, but they said, no, you're going to Colorado, Fort Carson, Colorado. So I went. We got there. There wasn't even a place to live. The barracks had weeds and tumbleweeds and stuff piled up around them. There was just me and one other guy. And the guy that took us down there in a Jeep, he said, I'll go get you some tools. So he got us some tools, and we started clearing a path in there and cleaning out the barracks, chasing scorpions out and all that kind of stuff. Come to find out that we were getting ready to form a special unit out there to train guys to go to Vietnam. We didn't know it at the time, but that's what we were there for. And they formed this unit there. Well, it was just he and I. So the first Sunday it rolled around, he claimed to be a Christian. And of course, I was kind of hesitant about that, but I said, well, I'm a Christian too. I said, why don't we go to chapel on Sunday? And we did. It was in 1963. And it was 10th day of November. And after chapel, the chaplain said, there's a guy out here named Carl Vargo. He's with the Navigators. And he said, if any of you want to follow up with spiritual matters, he said, you go out and see him. He'll see you at the back out there. Well, I went out there and I met Carl Vargo. And the next day was November the 11th, which was a holiday. So he invited me and this guy to go out to the Glen Erie, which is the headquarters of Navigators outside of Colorado Springs. So we went out there and spent the day with him. And I got introduced to something called discipleship. And I accepted Carl as my mentor. I was a new believer. I didn't know anything, ignorant about Christianity, about the Bible and everything. And he started me studying the Bible on a regular basis. He started me memorizing scripture, which I still do today. And he met with me twice a week, once in a little small group where we met in our barracks, a little Bible study, and once on the weekend individually, one-on-one, to bring me along in my Christian growth. And Carl is still my mentor today. That was in 1963 when I first met him, and he still follows up with me today.
How old is Carl today?
Carl is not quite as old as I am. I'm not sure exactly how old he is, but I know he's... The thing that amazed me about this guy, he used to walk 2 miles to come down to our barracks for that Bible study every Tuesday night. He was a polio survivor. He had one leg that was drawn up like that. Had a shoe with a sole on it about that thick. You might have seen some of those.
Right.
And he got off the bus at the gate when he came on the base at Fort Carson, and he walked 2 miles down to our barracks because we were in this isolated place called the Mule Barn area. That was something else to see too, was to see him bring these mules out every morning, the mule artillery. And the mules would line up without anybody telling them to. And the guys would put the artillery on them, and they'd take off and go up these trails up in the mountains to set up the artillery up there, and then they'd come back in the evening. It was something to watch. They even came out sometimes, one time, and filmed it. Yeah. And the mules have been doing it so many years.
Yeah.
But anyway, Carl used to come out there, and I'd see him coming down the road, hobbling along on that great big heavy shoe with that big thick sole on it. He's had some surgery since then and has got that fixed to where his leg is straight. And he doesn't have to have that anymore. But Carl followed me, and he's met with me many times. We met 2.5 years there at Fort Carson, and then other places I've been, we've met. And he checks up on me by phone, email, and snail mail every once in a while. And he and his wife have been doing college work for years now instead of military work. And he finally retired from that. And he's just ministering and to students at the some university in Texas A&M. They have a large international student body there.
Yeah.
Thousands, especially Orientals. But Carl has followed up on me. And the same thing that he led me through is the same thing that I'm doing with the guys that are in recovery right now. Most of them are either nominal Christians, people that grew up in church and never really became Christians. Some of them are atheists like I was. And of course, we've got them in a captive audience up at Brian's Safe House. And I teach them on Wednesday mornings. And I've got them doing the same study that Carl took me through. And teaching them how to memorize scripture and things like that. And a number of them really get into it and enjoy it. And really, some of them have come to know Christ as their Savior and been baptized and are growing in grace now. But I'm only here today by the grace of God, and I want to be sure I give God credit for that, because I was near death those several times. I've looked death in the face. I looked death in the face when I went out that 5th floor window in San Antonio that time. They thought I was dead. Looked death in the face when I got run under by a Volkswagen. They thought I was dead. They went off and left me. I thought I was dead when I fell down a mine shaft in Germany one time when I was walking guard duty drunk. And I was down there for 3 hours before anybody came along and rescued me. And I thought I was going to die when I was down in old Mexico, in jail down there at one time. Because down there, back in those days, their jail was just an open courtyard with a little shelter on the inside of the wall with an open courtyard out in the middle of it. And everybody was in there together, and they didn't feed you unless you had a family or somebody to bring you food. And of course, I had no family. I was AWOL from the military. And these other prisoners shared their food with me. So I thought I would probably die in there. Couldn't speak the language at that time. I have learned a little Spanish since then. These guys shared their food with me, and I finally got it across to one of the guards that I was an AWOL military person, and that there was a $25 reward for me.
It got you out of there quick, didn't it?
Within less than 24 hours, I was out of there. They turned me over to the military. Of course, I spent time in jail on account of that, and a lot of jail time. When I was in Georgia, stationed in Georgia in the Air Force, I spent a good bit of jail time there, both military and civilian. I used to go to town. Bars, some of the places that I like to drink didn't even open up till 10 o'clock at night. They stayed open till daylight then. So I'd go in and I'd get a nap after work in the evening, and then go in the bars at 10 o'clock and stay till daylight.
And then come back and go to work.
Yeah. And do the same thing next day. Same thing, that kind of stuff. It's a wonder I wasn't dead. Tried to kill myself twice. It was unsuccessful. Once with a blade, once with a rifle, a carbine. Didn't work. So and I could have died from withdrawal. That nurse said, let's try this experimental drug on him.
Give him as much as as much as you want.
Yeah, he's gonna die anyway. I didn't die. Coming to West Virginia was a God thing. I'd never been to West Virginia before, except once when I was a kid. My stepmother had some relatives up here in Elkins, and we came over to visit them one time. Of course, West Virginia, I never even thought about coming here to teach. But after I retired from the military, I went to college and came out of college and went to Delaware as a principal of a small Christian school, country school down in Lower Delaware. I also taught math and science. Principal half a day and teacher half a day. And,